Hi there. So today I want to talk a little bit about the new displacement options in Blender 2.78. I apologize in advance if I sound a little bit weird. I have a bit of a cold, but I did want to do this anyway before 2.78 releases. I'm using the release candidate right now, so I doubt a lot of things will change. And I've been having a lot of fun with it, so let's dive right in and I'll show you how to set it up and where to find everything. So to begin with, one of the most important things is it's already set on my Blender by default is make sure you're set to the experimental cycles engine, and then that way you can actually have access to all the different options that the displacement has to offer. So I'm just going to do something very simple. I'm going to create a round cube. I like using this object because it's all quads, and we can really see the influence very well of the displacement on it. Now I'm just going to use a procedural map for now. You could use any kind of map you wanted to, you know, whether it be a JPEG, a TIFF, or an EXR, or whatever, or something that you painted yourself. And it would work pretty much the same way. Now I'm going to keep it simple and just use some built-in procedural maps in Blender and show you the power of these things and what kind of crazy stuff they can do. So before I get started, I'm just going to load in an environment map. So I'll turn on the render here for a second and let's grab an environment texture. I tend to use similar ones over and over again, so I really like this kitchen one. It's created by Maxine Ross, and you can find it for free on the internet. You can download it. Definitely throw in some likes because these are actually really well done. I use these in a lot of projects. I found that they work quite well. So second thing I'm going to do is just set this to smooth, and there we go. So right now I'm just rendering. I have a very basic white sphere. Maybe turn down the HDR a little bit more so you can see what we're doing. Very simple. It's not very subdivided. So let's get started with the displacement first and then look at all the different options. I'm going to set this to be my node editor. And we keep the material white so you can see exactly what's going on all the time. So there we go. And that's it. So I'm going to use a noise texture that I'm going to play around with a little bit. First I'm going to check it out. So this is a color noise. Generally you'd use the factor and the displacement. It doesn't really matter that much because the conversion happens once you use it, but you know, if you're going to keep it all gray connections, it means it's a singular float value, so you keep it nice and tidy, and you know, you don't get any unexpected results. So I'm going to crank the scale up a little bit by decreasing the value, bring up the detail, and mess with the distortion because this gives really interesting results. Actually, maybe bring the scale back down a little bit. Let's see what happens when we use that. So right now, if I were to plug this into the displacement, we get this weird sort of looking bump map. And so far the behavior isn't really any different from 2.77, and we need to sort of activate the displacement, and we'll have a look at all the different options we have. Now, to actually set this displacement up, remember, after setting this to experimental, otherwise you won't see a lot of these. If you go to your material on the right here, actually go down to settings, you'll see you'll have a displacement option. Now in previous versions of Blender, this was still this is still applicable, but the later options that you'll see down in the render settings have actually, you know, they've been renewed a little bit, and it makes a little bit more sense now to use them, and I think they've done a pretty good job. And I'll show you exactly what happens. So I've set this to true, which means it's actually going to use this noise texture as a map to subdivide the round cube and actually displace out the geometry. Now I've noticed that if you just set it, you have to reload the render and you'll see some stuff is happening, but not really that much. Now there's a few reasons for this. One of the first reasons is that we have a very low poly count on the round cube. So generally when you want to displace, you want to have, you know, a bit of a higher count, just so you can go down a little bit further in the subdivision on the displacement and get some really nice detail. So I'm going to do that first. I'm just going to subdivide smooth and just give it, you know, 2 or 3 cuts so we have something a little bit more smooth to work with. So see what happens. We're still not really getting much of a result, but that's all right, because there's actually a bunch of stuff that we need to look at to begin with. First thing I'm going to do is actually stick a math node in between these two. And if you set this math node to multiply, you can actually get a really nice way of controlling the displacement of how far it pushes out. So let's say I'll set this to 5. I'm just going to set it fairly extreme, and then you'll see we start getting some displacement in our mesh. Now, if we look at this noise texture, this is way more detailed than what we're actually getting. So what do we need to do to actually make it look right? Well, if we go down to our render settings, you'll see a geometry tab, and this is exactly what we're going to do. Now, for most people, this will actually be set to 8 by default, and the max subdivisions of 12. I like to turn this down so I get a bit of a bit of more quality in my preview, let's put it that way. So basically what this does, if you hover over, it tells you exactly what it is. It's the size of a micropolygon in pixels during the preview render. So this one is during the final render. So let's say I'm just doing this in preview render. Let's say turn this down to 8, we don't really see a lot going on. Let's say I turn this down to 1, so the same as the render. Now this might take a little while to build. There's really not that much going on still. So what's the reason for this? What's happening now? Well, to activate the displacement, I'm going to set this back down to 3 so we don't crash our viewport. To actually activate it, we have to add a subdivision surface modifier, and you'll see there's a new option called adaptive, and turning that on will get a dicing scale. So what's really nice is you'll see this dicing rate refers to the options that we had before. So in the render size, we'll have 1 pixel, 1 micropolygon is the size of 1 pixel, and the preview stage, 1 micropolygon is about the size of 3 pixels. So we could even further adjust this on what should I call this, a object by object basis by setting the scale. So let's say if we put this down to 0.5, you'll see in the preview I'll be down to 1.5 pixels micropolygon size, and in the render 0.5. Now generally once you get a hang of this, you'll see your results appearing, but now that this says we've added this, if I go back to a rendered view, you'll actually see we're getting a lot of detail. So this is set to 1 and this is set to 3. So our pixels are now, our micropolygons are now the size of about 3 pixels. So what happens when we go crazy with this? Well, obviously we're going to get a lot of RAM usage, and you can control this by bringing the max subdivisions down. So to actually get to this point, if we're going to render even to the preview point, what Blender is going to do internally, right before it starts rendering, it's actually going to start subdividing this over and over and over again. And you can control this by the amount of subdivisions. Now, the cool thing is, this gives you a lot of flexibility, really, because you can have the dicing rate sort of halved in here and add extra cuts in where you need it. And it's hard to explain, but it's sort of all these 3 values that you're going to be balancing. So the ones in here, the max subdivisions, and then the ones in the adaptive subsurf modifier. So I'm just going to add a camera in, have a quick look. Let's see, I have to set this up a little bit more. Let's move it in the middle, and let's set this to like 640 by 640. We'll keep it fairly small. Zoom in a little bit so you can actually see what's going on. And right before I'm going to hit render, I'm going to show you really quick. So this is what the 3 pixel subdivision sort of look like, the 3 pixel micropolygon size. So if I hit render now, first I'm going to save really quickly. So if it crashes, because obviously we're still working with experimental features, it's always good to save. If it crashes, we actually can go back. So I'm going to hit render now. I'll start computing the displacement, and you'll see we get even more detail. So this is a really great way to get some super intricate detail, and it works really well, I've found. They've done a really good job on making this happen. Now, some of you might be wondering, well, so what is like the perfect setting? I hear that from students a lot as well. They always sort of want to ask me like, what's the perfect setting? What's the perfect setting? Again, this really depends on your scene. The cool thing about this being adaptive, and when you think about it, is if this object would be way further back in the scene and you're still using 1 pixel per micropolygon, well, that object is so small, it's actually not going to take all that much time to calculate because it's quite small and displacement won't be super visible. Generally, if you go under 1 pixel, let's go to 0.75, you see a little bit of a difference, but it's got some serious diminishing returns. And you don't really see much of a difference beyond a certain point. And again, all of this depends on your scene. Something to keep in mind, though, is that the further you go, let's see if we can actually make this crash. So if I go down to 0.35, still working just fine, obviously, because I'm not hitting render. Let's go back to 0.5. Let's see what happens when I try to render this. Displacement is something that's insanely memory intensive. So even though this is a very simple object, we're already getting quite a bit of memory usage. And if I were to push this further and further, then obviously I'd run out of memory on my GPU and it just wouldn't render. So it's something to really consider. How much displacement do you really need? And do you really need to go that far? Now, that being said, if we zoom out a little bit and let's go crazy and really push the displacement up in the value here. So let's put this up to 15, see what happens. You get these really wildly crazy forms, which would be quite hard to achieve with just a regular subsurf modifier and a displace modifier. So that's how I used to do things, and it was incredibly memory intensive because you'd be basically subdividing the whole mesh, 6-7 times, and depending on where you were, it wouldn't really make much of a difference, but it would be, an insane memory hog. And this is a really nice way of doing stuff. So let's see if we displace this further. Again, I'm going to render this. It's starting to take a while and it's not quite as fast anymore. Now, the other thing to consider is if I'm going to double this resolution, for example. Again, this is all based on pixel size. So by doubling this resolution, we actually have doubling the dimension, so we actually have 4 times the resolution. So your mesh is probably going to have to be 4 times, just very linearly speaking, it's probably going to have to be 4 times more detailed when you actually start displacing it and subdividing it. So it's definitely something to consider. So I'm going to set this to full screen for a second, and we'll see if I can actually still render this, because obviously we're going to need way more subdivisions because we've got a really, really tiny subdivision rate. I'll see if it works at 0.5. I might run out of memory. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. It's very trial and error when you start working with this kind of stuff. So I'm going to hit F12, and you see the tessellation. It's starting to take a lot longer. Building everything, it's taking a lot longer, and it looks like it's going to do it, but I'm up to quite a bit of memory. Now, I've got to admit, I've been using this on the GPU for the most part. I've got quite a powerful GPU with a lot of memory, but I think even on GPUs with like 4 to 6 gigabytes, you could do some pretty crazy stuff before it really starts becoming an issue. As you can see, you get this insane detail. I've been having a lot of fun with this in the last couple of days, and you're able to control stuff quite nicely. And there you go. So it renders. It's not super fast. I'm not going to render the whole thing, but just to give you an idea of the amount of detail that you can now achieve, it's absolutely gorgeous. Now I want to go back to one last thing that I didn't completely finish. And if we go back to our settings here that we had to set up, if I set this back to bump, then obviously we're back to the old method. Now, if we set this to both, then we'll use it both as a bump map and as a displacement. So again, I'm going to save. And here you see what happens is, because we've set this value up really high because we want a lot of displacement, the bump map looks absolutely terrible. So this would be a really good case for us to do something like this, where we're actually going to use the bump vector map. We'll throw the height map in here and use this one. And then if we're going to set this to true displacement only, just refresh the render for a second, you'll see we can actually control our bump map, and we can add it in after the fact. And it should still work unless I'm mistaken. And it's quite hard to see on this, but I think we are getting a little bit more detail in it as well. So these are all things to consider. I just want to make a quick video about this because I think it's one of the most exciting features in the 2.78 build. I think the guys did a really good job. There's a lot of cool stuff, but this is definitely one of them. And just let's see, you know, hopefully I'm not going to make everything crash now, but other stuff you can do as well, which is really cool, is you can multiply all these different maps. So let's say we have a Voronoi texture, which if we preview this sort of looks like this. So we get these cool bridges. What we could do is actually mix these together. And again, how you mix these is, where are we? With a math node, because you're dealing with singular values, so singular floating point values. So you could actually use a math node for this. So let's see, we'll add the Voronoi onto the noise texture. There we go. And pipe that into the displacement. Excuse me. And if we render again now, you'll see that the Voronoi has been added on top of the other displacement. So if I just turn off border for a second, you'll see it goes completely crazy, and it's really cool. And that being said, let's say if we were setting this to, where are we? I think it's maximum. You know, you get all different kinds of results depending on the different ranges that you use. Now, I've used this, I've used the regular color mixer as well. The mix RGB, because it gives you options like screen and you know, multiply and stuff like that. If you're more comfortable using those, you can use that one to mix your maps as well. But again, let's see. We have some pretty hefty subdivisions. If we bump these up, for example, and just, you know, let's see how far I can push it. It might crash, but you know, we can keep trying until we run out of memory or something crazy happens. Let's just let it run. See, it's taking a while, but it's nice that you're able to get like a really nice preview of what's going on, and you're able to control that separately, and just to be able to see it in the viewport render is awesome. So I really like the approach they've taken with it. I think it's really well done. So now we see the second Voronoi map sort of pushing through as we've, you know, added it in, and you get some really interesting results. And you know, I encourage everybody to give it a shot. Let's see, the reason I'm doing this is people actually asked me about this, so I'll see if I can find something really quickly to show you what I was doing with it. So this is just a raw render. Let's see if we can drag it in. I was creating this weird stuff, and this is, I believe, as far as I know, a noise texture with quite a bit of distortion. So just goes to show you with the amount of stuff that you can do. I was using a shader here that was dependent on slope and things like that. So it's quite amazing to see, you know, all the stuff it can do. And yeah, like I said, I've been having a great time with it. So I guess that covers that. I hope this is useful to somebody, and yeah, I'll catch you next time. Happy blending. See ya.